President Klaus, thank you once again for taking place.
Thank you.
And so we have prepared a few questions, open questions, and to really get to grasp the picture about the whole Corona issue and what has changed so far.
Yeah.
People are confused. What is really going on from your perspective?
People are really confused, and they have becoming more and more confused, to my great surprise on the one hand, and I am sorry about it, and I am afraid of it. I met yesterday my good friend for 40 years, and I understood that he is really personally afraid of Corona. He's a sophisticated mathematician, economist, and we wrote several books together, and I was really shocked. He told me, my 3 daughters are attacking me, with regards my views, and I said, well, this is it is probably the reason is that they are not well educated. The parents missed something, the parents lost something in their education. So we had a real fight with someone whom, as I said, we wrote many articles together. So I am surprised, I must say, I am surprised. I suppose that the people are more stable in their views, in their positions, and it is not true, to my great regret.
Okay. So what do you think is then, why is all this happening? For what purpose?
Well, I disagree with talking about purpose. This is already a very clear interpretation of the origin of the whole issue. I don't think that there is a purpose or the purpose. I can't imagine that there is someone sitting somewhere and organizing the whole event. This is not true. I compare it with an avalanche. Definitely everyone says that the avalanche starts or can start with a small stone, small piece of something which is moved, and then the huge avalanche destroys the whole village or something. In this respect, I wouldn't call it a purpose.
Okay.
So there were several small stones which start the avalanche, but I don't think that they were purposefully created. Or, to put it differently, they were not strong enough to create this final event which we have been experiencing. So in my opinion, there was a small stone at the beginning of the avalanche, and then it came together with very strong synergy of various interests on the one hand, and ideas or ideologies on the other. The mixture of interests and ideology, which is normally in human society the case, But they didn't start it purposefully.
Okay.
These interests and these ideas, but together, this synergy of all of that, which was not created by anyone.
Okay.
Is, in my opinion, the explanation of the whole tragic story.
I mean, yesterday when we had lunch together, basically you were mentioning that powerful forces are pushing for lockdown and more. So who are these forces? Can you describe them?
These forces are, I have to return to my previous sentence, these forces are the representatives both of various business interests on the one hand, and ideological interests and ideologies on the other. So there are people who can really have a profit connected with this pandemic and with all the vaccinations and all the lockdowns, and so there are such people. But I always stress that there was no the original godlike father who started the whole pandemic and the whole tragic event.
Okay. So you believe so there is not an end game related to this or something that they want to achieve in the future?
No, this is definitely not my way of looking at things. Synergy of both interests and ideas, but the aim a priori existing somewhere in the air, definitely not.
So, but when we look how all these different forces have views, this kind of corona crisis, all these different interest groups which came together, maybe just by coincidence because of the avalanche that started. Do you see a kind of social engineering also linked with it when you look into the tools being used?
Definitely, but in my way of thinking, there are aspects of social engineering in it, which means there are partial attempts of social engineering in this respect. Yeah. But again, I refuse to see it as a social engineering as such, an sich. German.
So all this, the social distancing, the masks which didn't work at the beginning. Now you have to wear a mask and so on. It's all the kind of conditioning, a kind of social engineering. Is that going that?
Well, this is part of the story of the attempt to destroy free, liberal society, Western society, and all of that existed in the past. All these attempts to destroy our world, our Western civilization have existed for a very long time, definitely. But they needed a good moment. They needed to find an opportunity when to make the radical move to the destruction of our freedom and of our liberty, of our prosperity, of our economy. And that moment, in this respect, the pandemic helped to help them to achieve their goals.
Okay. So how do the principles of a free society contrast then with those of a socially engineered society?
We who experienced communism and I spent still 2/3 of my life in a communist society, so the experience is very deeply rooted in my body, in my thinking. So this experience motivated us after the fall of communism to change our society, to introduce freedom, to introduce free markets, to introduce standard constitutional parliamentary system and so on. But I must say that I was surprised to find after the fall of communism 30 years ago, while making speeches in Western Europe, to discover that they are not so radical as I am. They looked at me with suspicion. Why I am so much for free society? Why I am so much for free markets and so on. I remember I had at the very beginning I refused radically the whole idea of the third way. Mm-hmm. And it was not understood in Western Europe. I was considered a crazy radical because all of them more or less accepted. Yeah. Not all of them, but the mainstream accepted sort of third way. I was always attacked in Germany or Austria, the German-speaking countries of Europe, when I was fighting for free markets, as I said, without adjectives. So in my I always stressed any adjective added to that means making it unclear and somehow not well defined. So of course in Germany and Austria they understood it, probably in Switzerland as well. They understood it as an direct attack on the founding idea of Germany and Austria after the Second World War, the social market economy. I refused to accept the term social market economy, and they look at me as someone a little bit crazy. So those were my fights at the very beginning. I mean, immediately after the fall of communism. So we understood that they looked at it differently. Our experience was communism, which was negative in many respects. Nevertheless, our experience with communism gave us something, gave us a special understanding of social mechanisms, of political mechanisms, of society. When there was a tendency here to say that we lost 40 years. I said, of course, I lost 40 years of having a chance to teach abroad, to go skiing to Switzerland or things like that. But I think I learned a lot as well. So it was not a total waste of time for me. And that's the reason why we look differently at the developments in Europe, in the crazy world of European Union. This is why we are much more radical than many Europeans about the situation in the United States of America. That's why people like me are definitely in favor of Trump, not of Biden, and so on and so on. So this experience gave us something very important.
Okay. I mean, you have, we have given away quite some liberties for the greater good, also with this Corona crisis. Do you believe it will be possible to return to the pre-Corona days, or can you please explain, what a ratchet effect is?
So one thing is my wish and my intentions to fight for. And another thing is my expectations or my extrapolation of events I see now. So when I speak about the passive extrapolation of what I see around, I am afraid that there is no chance to return to the pre-Corona days. It doesn't mean that that should be an excuse for anyone from us not to try to do it, not to fight for that. Don't confuse those two positions. But when I just look around, I'm afraid that the people, accept the new brave new world, and this we are really approaching the brave new world of Aldous Huxley, and more than we expected when we in the communist era discovered that book. So one more remark to such utopias or dystopias as Huxley and Orwell. In the communist era, we loved both Huxley and Orwell, but for us, book which was much more relevant was George Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm, because at that moment we felt the political oppression, the direct political oppression. Yeah. And therefore Orwell was our guy, who all of us distributed here and copied on our writing machines. And so I know people who simply typed the Orwell's book and made it 6 times plus 6, which means to have 36 versions of that book, the copies of that book. No one was doing that. We, of course, appreciated very much Brave New World by Huxley, but no one at that time would copy Huxley's book in that very, very difficult way.
Okay.
Now, I must say that some 20 years ago, we started to think twice, to think about it, and now I would say, and I think for the first time I mentioned that idea 10, 12 years ago. I said, it seems to me that a more relevant book for us is Brave New World, not 1984, because the enemy is not direct politically given or interpretable. We are moving more and more into the Brave New World of Aldous Huxley. So this is the realization of it. I must say this is a tragedy for me and for all of us.
Yeah. So, what is now more deadly than the virus or the response to it?
Well, I think that what is really deadly is this, as is the title of our book, the self-destruction of the West. Yeah. This is more deadly than coronavirus. There have been many viruses of that type in the history, even if I don't mind that this new one is slightly different and probably artificially created. Nevertheless, I think what's really the danger is that we are losing the principles of a free society, which is for us connected with the West.
Okay. So this is basically the book all about.
This is the book. This is written by my colleagues in the institute where we are just now. All of us look at it from different perspectives, but the way of thinking is very similar.
Okay. Do you find the level of global coordination of media and government policy suspicious? Because it was really interacting all together, the same message, the same narrative. Was it something that you expected or that you find strange?
Well, I would differentiate between the coordination of the media and coordination of governments. Well, I was always not a great fan of international organizations. Stop. Never, therefore, I was from the very beginning, since the very beginning, attacking the European Union, and for me, I always considered practically irrelevant the United Nations. Okay. I was joking when I was Prime Minister, and at that moment, relatively powerful Prime Minister, vis-à-vis my president of the country, Vaclav Klaus, and there was at the beginning of the year a meeting of two of us, and the people around us, dividing who will attend what kind of international gatherings. And I remember we are talking about the 1990s. Without paying attention, I said, please go to the United Nations annual meeting in Washington, D.C. This is something which is totally beyond my interests and beyond any meaningful relevance. It was a slightly different time. It's, to my great regret, more relevant now. Nevertheless, this is an example of what I considered important. On the other hand, to attend at the beginning as only guests the EU summits was something what I considered very important. So I was always critical to the international organizations because they are not based on authentic interests and authentic aspirations. And so a friend of mine, whom I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, we discussed it yesterday with him, and he said that the whole idea of globalization is, and he's a very free market Misesian type of person who writes sophisticated theories, mathematical, more mathematics than economics in it. And he said that the idea of globalization, which is a radical statement, the idea of globalization is the victory of the loss, of the losing battle, losing war, of the loss of the idea of well-defined property rights.
Okay.
This is a radical statement. The whole idea of globalization and globalism is based on the idea of refusing the concept of property rights, because property rights are more or less eliminated. The properly defined property rights are more or less eliminated in the world of globalism and globalization. Isn't it a good idea?
Absolutely. I think property rights has a lot to do also with borders.
With the definition of the space you live in, or you occupy the space where you decide, where you have rights. Yeah. So in this respect, I answered excellent. This is a good point. I will use it. But more or less, I would say I discuss it under a different in a different setting or under a different title. I think I discussed it always while refusing to talk about human rights, but to speak about the citizens' rights, Bürgerrechte. Yeah, this is a total difference because there is no citizen in the world, therefore he cannot have rights. You know, Bürger in Switzerland has rights because that's a closed world, closely defined entity, politically defined entity, whereas the world is not a politically defined entity, and the rights are meaningful only in politically defined entity plus economically. But in the world without a politically defined structure, rights are really practically not interesting, as we see that all of the UN members accepted the idea of human rights, both Saudi Arabia and the Netherlands.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's also a good point when it comes to the freedom of speech, the right to speak freely your own mind. And when we look at the whole corona and all the information by the media and on a global scale, what do you think about the complete lack of a debate over the pandemic policy? No different opinions. It was basically one mainstream narrative.
There is a mainstream idea, but there are different views. Let's say not so clearly defined in the mainstream newspapers, but in the world of various internet servers, which are sometimes more powerful than the local newspapers. You know, there are still, at least in my country, there are still debates. Okay. Maybe more than in Germany, for example. Yeah. But the fight exists here, really.
So you have different opinions even in the mass media when it comes to Corona.
I would say not so much in the mass media, but even in the main dailies you can find articles, and they I think I have an article in a daily. Let's say we have 5 of them, approximately, printed newspapers. You know, the meaningful, important, all over the country, 5, let's say, approximately. And I would say that I have at least 2 serious articles per month in all of them, which means 2 per month in a month, which means 20 in a year. You know, still, and you can imagine that my views are the same there as what I demonstrate here today to you. So there is still some sort of not, I wouldn't call it totally free, but a serious debate in this country.
Excellent. Well, good to hear. I mean, you know, this debate, for example, is missing in, I think, in Germany and in
this is missing in Germany, and not that much in Switzerland. I would, even if I'm afraid I don't have time to, I don't have a chance to see Neue Zeitung when, how, you know. But I'm afraid that even the NZZ has moved a little bit. But I from time to time follow the Weltwoche, the Swiss Roger Köppel, and this is a free journal. Absolutely. I would say.
He's publishing all different opinions, from the left, from the right. You know.
Yeah.
It's a great publication.
But such a publication doesn't exist in Germany, I'm afraid.
You have smaller ones like, you know, Eigentümlich Frei, I mean, you know, classic liberals, but they don't reach out to as many people as, for example, or it's not such a heavyweight as...
This isn't the mainstream, but Roger Köppel is part of the mainstream in Switzerland.
Absolutely. When we look into, you know, at the economy, I mean, up to now, what do you think? How much damage has already been done by the lockdown? How much can we expect if this continues? And we don't know how long. I mean, it can be a few months, could be a year.
First, the damage is huge, and the damage has repercussions and consequences, definitely, which those people who don't want to hear it try to refuse. You know, they think there's a fall, economic fall. And what? It will grow again, which is a total nonsense. This is definitely not true. Second, one thing is potential second wave, third wave, 10th wave of Corona and new lockdowns. But I think this is only part of the story, because there is a delay, there is a time, there is a lag in the economic impact. So I think that this is not the end of the consequences of the first lockdown. It will have consequences because many firms can survive it for some time. But now you see the problems that are reappearing, not connected with the second wave of Corona, just the follow-up of the first wave. This is what we see and what we feel. So this is the economy. At the same time, I'm shocked with the developments in the public finance field. As a former Minister of Finance who considered the balanced budget as a must, as something unavoidable, and something I can't imagine not to have, you know, I am absolutely shocked, and I remember that we have been waiting for the result of the year. It takes several days when all the flows of money in the statistics. So we were waiting for the results, and we wanted a balanced budget. But anyway, the debate was about billions of Czech crowns.
Yeah.
Now the question is about hundreds of billions. So this is a total disappearance of elementary thinking, which was considered necessary for the whole history of mankind. You know, sometimes violated, but basically it was accepted that this is a rational idea to have a balanced budget. Now I think even that idea has been lost.
So, but I mean, then the way I understand you is, we have most likely we're going to see a huge economical crisis, the results of it, of the impacts. Global supply chains have been disrupted. A lot of companies who were in the farming business, food business has also been disrupted. So I think we are seeing famines mainly right now in the third world, but moving. So we have a scarcity of goods and services, and we have inflation basically when it comes to money printing, government budgets. I mean, everything stands. I mean, it's really where we are at a point where we can say the old world might be phasing out. What can be the replacement of it?
The replacement of a free market is just one. And this is either total chaos, anarchy, or a sort of planned economy, or to put it in a Walter Eugen's German term, administered economy. This is the Walter Eugen's famous article in 1946. A centrally administered economy was his description of Germany in the Hitler's era. So I don't insist on using the term planned economy. I think the Eugen's term centrally administered economy may be a proper one. So we are definitely moving into such a world.
So, but at the same time, it could be possible that we're going to see this centrally administrated, the heavy hand of the government on a different scale, maybe on a higher scale than a nation state, but, a centralizing system, centralizing even further. But at the same time, you also say it will be possible that we can see decentralized actions. So people are segregating municipalities, or certain regions segregating from the official system.
This was our experience in communism. When there is an irrationally centralized society, there always starts a decentralized activity. This is something understandable, but I don't think that the decentralized activity in a setting of highly centralized society with regulations of all kinds, that the decentralized activity can have positive economic outcomes. Yeah. That's another story. There is no doubt that in the crazy world of Soviet Union, when they collectivized the agriculture, and it was impossible to buy basic foodstuffs in Soviet Union for half a century. Yeah. The fact that the central planning simply didn't help in this respect. The fact that there were some local agricultural cooperatives which were able to bring some food to the main cities, that was definitely an improvement for a standard Soviet citizen. But this was not the market outcome. This was not the interplay of free forces bringing the cheapest product to the consumers. No, that was a way of escaping some rules, but Okay, it probably was a help to someone, but it was not a rational economic outcome.
Okay, yeah. Just to go back, finish the Corona stuff, basically. I mean, you also wrote another book about the quarantine. Quarantena. Can you elaborate quickly, if you would have to summarize it in a few sentences, what is all about this book?
Well, in fact, the book was written in the first, practically in the first 2 weeks of Corona, of the first wave of Corona quarantine, or as this called lockdown these days. You know, it was the reflection of the first feelings, and it was published daily in our main internet server. And so we commented various aspects of the Corona situation, which I think don't need to be rewritten today, because I think we expressed our basic views that this is not the way how to solve eventually even a dangerous pandemic. You know. So I still think it's relevant, and it discusses the long-term effects, the side effects, and definitely we refuse to discuss the medical issues as somehow unconnected with the social and economic and political issues. There is always a trade-off. There is always a trade-off between the number of people ill or dead and the political and economic and social consequences. This is not either or. There is always a trade-off, that the more of one thing, the less of another thing. So the society should accept the trade-off as in any other human activity.
Okay.
If you discuss in economic elementary microeconomic textbooks, the society either produces tanks, panzers, or butter. You know, this is a famous curve. Everyone knows. The same is in this respect. You know, and we have to look at it. We have to try to discover how the curve is posited, how the slope looks like, and to discuss the trade-off. And this is one of our main topics.
Okay. So too many different intellectuals working in their own field, not seeing the implications when it comes to another field of topic. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are also confused. You know, I mean, some people believe when the vaccine is coming, everything will be fine. I mean, what do you think about that vaccine?
Feelings? I am not an expert on vaccines, and I don't want to suggest that I believe in the quick appearance of a vaccine or not. No, I don't. I am not almost even not interested in those issues. This is beyond my field of knowledge. But what is really dangerous is that the modern vaccines include another additional problem, not just fighting the potential disease, but having side effects which can be as bad as the original disease. And this is the issue of the day, because some quickly introduced vaccines may have such a tragic side effects that it would be better not to use them.
So you personally, you would not go. I mean, the vaccine usually we're talking about 10 years, then it's called gold standard. So how to develop a vaccine to make sure that everything is fine. Now this time it would have been done in a few months.
You know, I am a lucky person, because I am I'm old enough not to pay attention to me personally, old enough to expect that there will be no vaccines during my lifetime. So I have an easy answer to that. Being of your age, I probably would look at it differently.
Okay.
We have all of us different discount rate when discussing the future.
Another point which is of interest because it's heavily debated is this immunity passports, digital ID. Is that something? Do you have something to say when it comes to that? Do you think it's likely, or is it just
No, I am afraid that you have many crazy things in the current world. The whole debate about global warming connected with the CO2. Yeah. CO2 licenses or something like that. Whether your house is CO2 neutral or not is part of the same story. So I can very easily imagine that such documents will be introduced and will be controlled by various governments and authorities. On the other hand, I think that in many countries, or some countries at least, the governments would not be able to introduce it. I'm afraid that other authorities, including the businesses, will introduce such corona passports for their workers, for their people working there, without the constitutional obligations to do it. Some people wouldn't be able to be employed without that, not because of the government decree, but because of the crazy behavior of business leaders all over the world.
Yeah. I mean, we know each other now for a few years, and you have always been a hero of liberty and also a big fighter for free markets. And that's how we met. So, do we have, what is your definition of a true statesman?
True statesman. The true statesman is someone who has his own views, his own opinions, his own principles, who is not waiting for the next morning newspaper announcement, who is not waiting for the last opinion poll results, who is simply going with some message, with some views, with some ideas, and who tries to introduce them in reality. So this is the real statesman. Politicians are aiming at something else. So politicians maximize their time in office. Yeah. The statesmen are fighting for a cause. They are not the rebels without a cause.
Okay. So do we have a deficit when it comes to statesmen in these days?
Yes and no. Yes is a standard answer by many people, but I have discussed with someone from Slovakia recently who told me, you are with all the troubles, you are still a lucky country with having a president of the state, a president with a personal history. Mm-hmm. And we in Slovakia have the last two presidents who are absolutely without any politically meaningful history. They simply appeared. They simply fell from heaven, Yeah. And so you are still a lucky country. Havel, Klaus, Zeman are three people with histories, you know. This is part of the definition of a statement, you know. And I answered, it's true. I'm afraid the next one will be without history. And I said, look, this is not a question of politicians without history. This is the issue of the lack of history.
Yeah.
Or of story,
Yeah.
not just history, of story, you know. And I said, well, we had, and the story begins at some crucial moment of a country. My country was built 100 years ago, 1918. There was a German occupation, 38, Munich Agreement, 38. There was a German occupation, there was the end of the war, there was the communist putsch in 1948, there was the Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1968, and there was the Velvet Revolution in 1989. All these moments created stories, or created histories, therefore made it possible for people, or politicians eventually, with stories and with human stories and with histories. And in the last 100 years of the existence of this country, of Czechoslovakia and then the Czech Republic, you know, we now have the visibly longest era without a historian. The average moment was 10, 15, 20 years between one event, historic event, and another one. Now it's 31 years without anything, which means it's not true that there are no politicians with some stronger views. The problem is that there are no histories, and I'm afraid that without a real economic, political, social, I don't know, kind of shock, which will shatter the country, there can't be statesmen or politicians with history. This is, in my opinion, a good point, which has a meaning.
Okay. In the face of the events this year, what would you have done if you would have been in that position back, as a prime minister or president?
This is a wishful thinking which I refuse to answer. Simply, I am not in such a position. Okay. I don't try to be. I don't want to simulate my potential answers. I would say I would never allow to come to this position where I have to decide now. Yeah. I think I would have changed something much earlier and wouldn't let the situation to be so. This is I know that this is fashionable for journalists to ask such questions, but I always refuse to answer it.
Okay, I mean. But when we look at the media and the public health system today, screaming for lockdown, a true statesman, would it still have been possible? For example, if you look back 20, 30 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, the whole pressure which is on politicians, on people in government.
I am not from Switzerland. I don't have the luxury to think about what the politicians would do 50 years ago. Yeah. We were deeply in the communist era. 50 years ago, we experienced the Soviet invasion into Czechoslovakia. So I can't speculate about what the people and the politicians would think about things like that.
I guess could you help us describe the kind of pressures a politician would be in with the media and public health environment this year? That was kind of the question. I
don't understand.
I mean, the media today, and the public health officials or the experts
In March, they were
screaming
for a lockdown.
what needs to be done, you know, all these specialists which only see their point of view, so they got a lot of exposure. And this is some, you know, the question is this something new, or is in the past, you know?
This is, I think my original answer was correct.
Okay.
We lived in a totally unfree society, so there was not a debate whether the experts could dictate the politicians something. This is just the result of the free world and not of our experience in the past. So I can't speculate about our past.
Okay. But then maybe we can say, you know, in the 20th century, we saw that the state mainly was controlling the information. This year, you know, I mean, over the last decades, we have seen that big tech companies, Facebook, Twitter, you know, social media, that they were pushing basically political propaganda in a way, even censorizing. How should the people deal with this overwhelming force which is unleashing on them?
In this respect, I would say that, to put it again differently into a perspective, we lived in a totally frozen society, non-free society. Then for a decade, or maybe almost 2 decades, we lived in a free society. Now we are returning back. So this is a pendulum moving from one side to another. So I am afraid that we have been introducing, not just we in this country, we have been introducing more and more rules which are similar to our experience in the communist past. So this is one thing which is absolutely clear. The names are different, the umbrellas are different, but the substance is more or less the same. So 30 years ago, in the moment of the fall of communism, we would have never expected that something like what we see now could happen. That was for unimaginable. Now we see that we are returning back, and that's the source of our disappointment.
Okay. Do you have a final message, a final advice that you can give to the viewers at this stage?
It's necessary not to forget history and to fight for freedom. That's the summary of my views.
Thank you very much, President Klaus, for this interview.